Hello and welcome to this webinar on how to overcome compliance roadblocks to digital innovation, brought to you in partnership with Comfort AG and Coalfire. My name's Catherine Cave. I'm Associate Editor of SC Media and your host for the next hour. In this webinar, we'll be looking at how to make sure you achieve digital innovation while maintaining effective data protection and remaining compliant. Most organisations want to go beyond just modernising their IT infrastructure. Instead, they want their IT investments to underpin true digital innovation and give them a tangible competitive edge. Unfortunately, digital innovation is hard to achieve because of factors such as data silos, alignment on transformation goals, data security and protection, and especially compliance roadblocks. To discuss this in more detail, I'm joined by two expert speakers. I've got Trevor Morgan, Head of Product Marketing at Comfort AG. Hello, Trevor. How are you? And where are you speaking from today?
Hi, I'm doing well, Catherine. I am in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, on the East Coast of the United States.
Oh, lovely. Long way from here. And we've all got Bhavna Sondhi, Principal Security Consultant at Coalfire. Hi, Bhavna. How are you? And where are you speaking from?
Hi everyone, thank you so much, Catherine. I am here from Boston, Massachusetts, and on the East Coast side as well.
Lovely. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise today. So over the next 40 minutes, we're going to look at the benefits of digital transformation, securing data in the face of inevitable breaches, being compliant and secure, implementing strong data-centric security to drive business practice. We'll also have some audience polls and Q&As for you to take part in, so please take part in those using the box below the video screen. Do remember also that this webinar will be available on demand 24 hours after it finishes, so you can catch up at any point or share it with colleagues. Now, without further delay, let me begin. So it's over to you, Trevor.
Great, thank you very much, Catherine. And I think we'll cue our slides now, if that would be good. Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your really busy day to join us on this webinar. Bob and I both know that your time is really valuable, so we appreciate you joining up and participating. As Catherine indicated, we're going to talk about compliance and data security and how these two concepts often threaten to become, and she used the term very specifically, obstacles to digital innovation. So hopefully you're going to learn today that they don't really have to be obstacles. But I want to draw your attention to one thing, that this is a bit of a fancy title, and I think we all do this when we create a webinar. We want to have a nice, clear, almost academic sounding title. At least I tend to do this. Let's try a different title that may help us narrow in on our subject. Stop fearing compliance and just focus on your core business. Now, that's probably easier said than done, and that's fair enough if you're thinking that. But we'll talk about how you start that process and how you ensure that compliance and data security don't block your ability to do business, basically to innovate. So the enterprise that fully embraces what I'm going to call digital innovation gains a distinct competitive advantage. But I realize I'm using a phrase that I need to define. What do I mean by digital innovation? Well, I'm going to use some other terms that you're probably familiar with. Concepts like digital commerce, digital modernization, transformation, SaaS, cloud services. I know that you've all heard of these, and these are all really important, and they're really significant goals to achieve. But one thing I want you to keep in mind is that these are milestones on a journey for any enterprise, any business. They're not end goals. The end goal, in my opinion, and hopefully yours as well, is that your organization is trying to use as many pieces of modernized digital technology along with your data to innovate and drive the business forward, so that the tools and the data aren't supporting cast members, they are the stars of the show. So let me summarize that. Digital innovation to me It's a multi-dimensional concept. It exists at an intersection of a company's strategy, its technology and tools, its data, and its processes. At that point where the enterprise is coming up with new ideas, new products to solve problems, and ways to improve on existing solutions, all for the benefit of the end customer. So there it is. Digital innovation to me isn't just upgrading your tool sets or your technology. It's a powerful enabler of the business. But very often, compliance and data security can inhibit the progress of any organization in trying to achieve that. Now, at Comforte, our enterprise customers share 3 common obstacles. 1, they're not just migrating data to the cloud, but they're transforming the organization's processes and tools and application architectures all in tandem. And what they're trying to do is take advantage of cloud first, cloud native, and ultimately DevOps processes. And we'll drill into those in a moment and the benefits of those. Number 2, they want to move much more quickly. They want to be, and I'll use this phrase very specifically, hyper agile. They want to be responsive to dynamic market forces. In essence, why am I looking at a snail? They don't want to move at a snail's pace. They're wanting to be really, really fast with what they do to get to market. And that's, of course, the reason for that first point. They're trying to upgrade their application architectures in order to do that. But number 3, they want to reduce risk and find a way to achieve compliance while handling their data rapidly and safely. And as we all know, fast and risk-free are usually opposing forces. If you've ever tried to drive somewhere really quickly, you know that point. You can go fast or you can go safe, but the two rarely go together. And data compromise, when we look at the enterprise, is unfortunately a frequent result if that conflict between fast and safe isn't resolved. So, because compliance is a very expansive and it's a thorny, complicated issue, I'm going to turn this over to Bhavna. I want her and her industry expertise to expand on this concept of compliance and clarify all of this a bit for us. Bhavna, I'd like to turn this over to you now.
Thank you, Trevor. Yes, before going into that, I think, Catherine, would you want to do the poll?
Yes, thank you very much, Bhavna. Yeah, so we've got a poll question for everyone, if that's okay. What percentage of your company's breaches targeted personal data in the year 2020? There are a few options for that. Please respond in the chat. Thank you. And over to you, Bhavna. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so thinking about breaches and what it is, it's a whole different topic altogether, but we are going to mainly focus on the compliance frameworks, give you some insights into what are the frameworks related to protection of the PII, the personally identifiable information. By now, almost all organizations are quite familiar with that. And what it helps is, it helps secure your cloud data by identifying or locating specific individual or user. And PII could be anything. It could be your social security number, your phone, your email address. And these are most common factors, but there are a lot of uncommon factors as well, such as IP address, login IDs, biometric data, geolocations, and many more. So, as you know, GDPR, one of the compliance regulations, it came into effect May 2018, and a lot of companies were affected by this who stored and processed the personal data of EU residents. What are the consequences of non-compliance and data breaches? It's the heavy fines that are imposed. For GDPR, it's up to 4% of companies' yearly revenue. And not having breach notifications in place causes additional concerns as well. So related to CCPA, this is another compliance framework, and it's one of the privacy laws in the United States. It went into effect January 2020. And what businesses have to now do is, on request from the California residents, to access, delete, and opt out of sharing or selling their information. And any non-compliance, even for the CCPA, is, again, heavy fines. It could be $2,500 per violation, and could go up to $75,000 for intentional violation. So what is the similarity when it comes to CCP and GDPR? Both of those laws, they have some requirements in common, which requires organizations to have breach notifications in place. They need to have privacy by design. There is access, portability, and erasure related requirements. And also the consumers have the right to object and rectify. So there are various of these similarities. And when it comes to HIPAA, there's another law, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which helps protect the health information. But when it comes to HIPAA, the covered entities treat PII as PHI. So, and there are two different rules when it comes to HIPAA, which is the privacy rule and the security rule. So all of these protection measures have to put into place when you are complying for any framework. Okay, again, there are fines imposed even when it comes to HIPAA, and there is additional prison time as well for violating that standard. The GLBA Act is another one, which is the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. It's the United States federal law, which requires financial institutions to explain how you share and protect the consumer's private information. Even with GLBA, there are non-compliance penalties and prison for personally liable officers. And it could go from anywhere from $100,000 to millions of dollars for an organization. So what is the similarity when it comes to compliance frameworks? What is similarity between them all? They all require protection of PII, and they're focused towards data protection and data privacy, helping companies achieve like the integrity, security, and availability of information systems. And all the sensitive data has to be protected. So rules and guidelines, they help companies protect the systems and data from all the security risk. The companies have to also demonstrate the security measures and controls utilized for providing adequate protection of data. What are the common causes of all of these data breaches? There are a lot of common factors, as you have noticed, reading news every now and then. Every morning I come up, I'm like, okay, there is this breach. There is this breach which involved weak and stolen stolen credentials, or there could be application vulnerabilities. There could be some malicious insiders who are misusing the data. So there are other causes as well, like malware, social engineering attacks, criminal hacking. So what is it that companies have to do really to ensure protection and ensure that common controls are implemented? Some of them are very simple, which are something that day-to-day business requires you to have in place. Something like access controls, making sure you have privileged access management, have appropriate remote access controls. There is data protection measures such as encryption and tokenization and pseudonymization that you would need to have for protecting any data. There's also auditing controls, auditing any of the events, activities, having appropriate policies and procedures, breach notification rules, and data loss prevention processes. So all of these combined are are seriously just the common controls that you have to implement, which gives you a baseline security to also meet most of the compliance requirements. Speaking about the actual PII protection techniques, we'll just focus on 2 or 3 here. Let's say you're storing some sort of PII in PII. And first, what you would need to do is identify what that PII is. Apply your data classification techniques in there. Who has access to that information? Where is it physically stored? There could be country and region specific requirements that you have to analyze. There are legal issues around storage of data. And all of this storage of data, it could be anywhere. It could be on the premise or it could be on the cloud. And what I'm trying to say is all of the requirements for protection still remains the same, even when you're storing it on premise or cloud. And what organizations are required to show that any sensitive data stored is protected to the degree required by law or regulation whenever you're storing it anywhere on the systems or it is in transit. What kind of protection techniques would you apply? We spoke about this just a bit earlier, like encryption, tokenization, pseudonymization, making sure you minimize the amount of PI you store anywhere. So all of these are important to consider whenever you are classifying or storing data or transmitting any data. It could be PII, it could be any other data required for storage within your organization. There's another poll question that will come up soon, but another protection technique would be not the protection technique, it's another control that companies have to implement, which is logging, trying to figure out who is taking specific action, what action has been taken, where and when was that action being taken. What it does, it helps to proactively detect any malicious activity and is useful for all the investigation purposes as well. These logs, they're like a gold mine for the information technology professionals because it allows for monitoring of health of applications, troubleshoot problems. And as you see, all various PII elements could get stored in the logs, but it's okay to do so. And the privacy laws allows for those storage. However, what you need to do is make sure you're adequately protecting it and making sure the access is provided appropriate for the individuals who need access for.
Thank you very much, Bhavna. That was really interesting. Very useful advice to people. Now, just for the audience's benefit, we've got another poll question. So have you had an assessment of your IT infrastructure to determine whether cloud computing might be a good fit for your organisation? So yes, no, or don't know are the options. Please do vote. It'd be great to have your feedback at the end. Thank you very much. And back to you, Trevor.
Actually, it would be me.
Sorry.
No worries. This was related. I just wanted to segue into the cloud security because the question came up. It felt like we want to talk about cloud as well because, as you see, a lot of companies are now trying to move over from on-premise storage environment to a cloud environment. But when it comes to cloud, there are some myths that are around where companies are not aware or companies are still trying to figure out who is responsible for what. So one of the myths is that you don't need to manage the cloud. Firstly, using compliant service providers does not automatically mean that your PII data is protected in the cloud. That data is still yours and you will need to protect that data. And we talked about the controls. There could be encryption and tokenization or some pseudonymization, various techniques that could be involved for protection. And of course, there are various service level agreements that you have to maintain with those cloud service vendors. and to make sure that appropriate security measures are applied for the responsibilities they share. One another myth is that cloud security is also fully the responsibility of cloud service provider. That's not the case. Yes, cloud service providers will share a lot of their responsibilities when it comes to cloud security, like the physical data centers and the security of the infrastructure and as such. However, there are a lot of controls that are still to be implemented by the organization who are hosting the environment in the cloud. Another myth is related to access control. It isn't a problem in the cloud. As you know, if most of you log in and you have a username and password ready to log in anywhere virtually in the world, and what it essentially means is, yes, service providers provide that capability out of the box, but there are a lot of controls that you would still need to go and implement to make sure that they are meeting the security standards and also the regulations. Let's take an example. For multi-factor authentication, if you are aware with the concept where you need two authentication factors at least, something user knows, something user has, or something user is. So if username and password is already provided and you have to still implement the additional factor, you still have to go and configure that, like having a physical token or biometric data. So what essentially we're trying to say here is that even when you store the data in the cloud, it still requires similar protection measures, and some responsibilities, yes, would be shared by the vendor, cloud service vendor, but you as an organization would still need to make sure that you are implementing and configuring the protection of data in the cloud as well. And Trevor will now take us further into details of how to go about achieving some of these. And back to you, Trevor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bhavna. That was fantastic and really sets up almost by magic, right, Bhavna? Almost sets up for the rest of the discussion, where I'm going to try to then get you all to visualize all of this in practice. Now, before yesterday, I was going to demonstrate all of this with one of our recent enterprise customers. But yesterday, literally, I was at a physician's office doing my annual physical work, and it's a mid-size practice, and that practice is part of a much larger medical system. And when you're in those situations and you're in the business that Bhavna and I are in, you become very hyper aware. I'm handed a stack of physical papers. I'm looking through all of them and signing them. I'm looking at all of the fields. If any one of those pieces of paper had gone to somebody else, that's a lot of my PII that potentially devastating if somebody were to get a hold of that. We had a bunch of us in the office. We all had our stacks of paper. We were giving them, obviously we were nicely distanced, but one at a time, going back up to the window. There were 4 or 5 people behind there who were doing lots of data entry. I took a peek at some of the applications. I wasn't looking at any data. Hopefully it was all masked. And I noticed that one of them actually was a cloud-based application. And at that moment, I realized this is where it becomes very highly personalized for all of us, in that, are they handling all of this data well? Realize that's going from digital to print, back to digital. And every time I go in, this seems to be the case. And all of this is getting fed into enterprise applications locally that get fed into probably a much more centralized, very large enterprise area, and then probably processed with any number of enterprise applications. So this is all very real to all of us. And ultimately, the point I want to make is that, you know, when this is done locally, that's one thing. But when it gets all fed into an enterprise organization, and Bhavna was alluding to this, where is this data? Is there duplicate data? Who's using it? Who's handling it? And most importantly, at every step of the way, is the data protected? So that's my personal example of this in motion. But I also want to then move over to that more enterprise focus. When all of this data gets put centrally, what are these organizations, these large healthcare providers, these large enterprises, what are they doing with that? Well, I alluded to that earlier. They're trying to find insights, whether it's better diagnostics, whether they're trying to find trends. Every single enterprise that gathers all of this data is trying to process and learn from it to drive the business forward. So now let me give you another example of one of our most recent customers. Obviously, we will keep everything anonymous, but this is a Fortune 500 customer, an insurance organization, I can say that much, and a rapidly growing one that is growing very quickly through acquisitions. Now, they were working in a classic legacy ecosystem for traditional claims. You can even imagine that personal scenario I just gave you. That's kind of a few steps upward of all of that information. So doing the claims processing, but they were rapidly migrating to applications in the cloud. And please keep in mind what Bhavna was saying. People often think that because we push it into the cloud and we've got service providers out there that it's all very much handled, we hope, right? But this organization was migrating their applications into the cloud. Why? Lots of reasons of economy and scale. But ultimately, one of the key parts of this was to apply machine learning and AI-based data analysis, basically doing data science again, so that they can find insights that they need to find in that data. So here was an example flow of what they were dealing with. They had data, it was moving operationally from on-premise environments, going up to AWS, getting groomed, then moving even further out into a GCP BigQuery environment. Then automated analytics processes were starting to handle and process it so that ultimately insurance risk management, risk reduction, and even prediction could occur. And again, that they could get the insights they needed to drive the business forward. That's digital innovation, upgrading everything to use the most efficient tools to drive the business forward. Move on to the next slide. Oh, we have a poll question here.
Thank you very much, Trevor, and some really, really interesting examples there. So just over to the audience, is data analysis using machine learning or artificial intelligence a major part of your business strategy? So answers yes, no, or don't know. Thank you very much. Please do vote. Back to you, Trevor.
And that's a great one. And keep that in mind for the rest of this, is that more and more enterprises, chances are your company, your organization is starting to leverage AI and ML-based techniques and tools to, let's just call it, do stuff with data. But back to this anonymous recent customer of ours. This customer had learned that in this really hyper-accelerated ecosystem where they're moving their application infrastructures into the cloud, legacy and familiar controls and protection methods don't function well. And Bhavna was talking about those. And we're not going to drill too deeply into those methods, but suffice to say here that they realized that moving so fast and into such a diffused infrastructure, you couldn't apply the old classic legacy controls and protection methods to safeguard that data privacy and meet those compliance goals and mandates that Bhavna was speaking of. As a matter of fact, a growing amount of this organization's transient enterprise data contains highly sensitive PII. That's why I was giving my personal example. It was that kind of stuff and other really highly regulated information. Let me ask you this question. When we talk about those legacy controls and protection methods, those are perimeter-based, border-based in large part. How do you protect all the borders around such amorphous sets of data that then go into the cloud? That's the crux of the problem that Bhavna and I are talking about, and striking that balance so that you don't slow down the organization. So as I said, unfortunately, traditional controls that come with modern cloud platforms, they actually tend to be from prior generations of what we'll call data at rest, data in motion access controls, and perimeter-based controls. And those won't necessarily get the job done. All you have to do is look at the ongoing breaches out there in the media to understand that that's the case. Now, I mentioned that this customer's workflow ended. It didn't actually end there, but there was a critical point where business critical data analysis based in advanced data science was occurring. And the entire workflow really was gearing up to that point to achieve this type of hyper agility, to really just consume all of this data. But one more critical point, hyper agility can only come through that type of automation. There's just too much data to do without automated processes and automated workflow tools. You obviously have the potential for data exposure in fast-moving data ecosystems, or worse yet, and this is even worse if you're taking notes, you protect it so heavily that you have an inability to use all of this data because those traditional protection methods to which Bhavna alluded can actually trip up automated ML and AI application work streams. It can basically choke the machinery. So it all boils down to another critical concept, which is format preservation. The protecting of all of this sensitive data and PII that Bhavna was talking about, but preserving the format so that the ML and AI-based applications deal with it well, and allow the organization to find the insights that they need to find in that. Now, with this example, anonymous customer, it's not as though they weren't trying to keep up with data security. They had gone to extreme lengths to try to run the gamut of existing data security. They had lots of solutions in place. They had early generation data tokenization. It didn't scale. They had data masking that worked somewhat in a dev and test environment, but it didn't work in the ML and AI-driven analysis environment that I was talking about earlier, one of those critical steps to finding the insights. They were actually struggling to move a merged IT infrastructure with many companies. Remember, this is fast growing. And so you're starting to merge IT infrastructures rapidly. And they were going from a data center centric model to that cloud distributed model that I was talking about. And Bhavna alluded to this. Where is all of this sensitive data? It's moving around so rapidly. Could there be duplications in this? Probably. Their data discovery mechanisms that they had really left a lot to be desired. And lastly, and by the way, put yourself in their organization. Are you starting to feel the stress? Here's one more. They had a really tight deadline for NACHA compliance, which would not be handled gracefully with data at rest protection, basically protecting borders around databases. That would have been very cost prohibitive. So that's this organization's attempt to balance all of this. And as we began to work with them, you can feel the tension. How do we strike this balance? There is a solution. And that's the happy part, is that the solution isn't as overwhelming as Bhavna and I are depicting, as long as you have the right people and the right tools in place to encourage ultimately that digital innovation, and keeping your eye on that. It's the digital innovation that you're after, not just upgrading tools or modernizing your environment. So we help them with the right solution to resolve these barriers while remaining in compliance. And it was obviously a little bit more complicated, but I need to keep this high level at a two-step process. But where data-centric security is concerned, and by data-centric, that's another key phrase I want you to remember coming out of this. We're talking about focusing on protecting the data, not necessarily the borders around it, and yet allowing it to move freely with the protection going with it, and also enabling those AI and ML mechanisms to work very gracefully with it, so that because of the format preservation. When I talk about data-centric security, that's what I'm talking about, not sort of protecting the borders and the data sitting idle within those protected borders. We all know, by the way, that if a hacker really wants to get through those mechanisms, those hackers will get to that. The solution is what I like to call, in that sort of logical statement, it's an and statement. You can comply and innovate. It's not comply or innovate. And that's ultimately the message that Bhavna and I are trying to get across. You can strike this balance. Poll question number 4. Catherine.
Thank you very much. So does your organisation incorporate data discovery and lineage analysis to guide proper data protection downstream? And the options are yes, no, or don't know. Thank you very much. Over to you again, Trevor.
We both love to hear the answer to this one because this is a critical step, and I'm going to get to that right now. Knowing, and I'm just picking up on the thought that Bhavna introduced, knowing where your sensitive data is becomes the first step in plugging those data security gaps and eliminating all of this potential risk. In the example with the anonymous customer I'm giving, we augmented and ultimately then replaced the existing discovery technologies that they had so that they could much more effectively find all of the unknown risky data. So we gave them the ability to find information on customers, but going beyond that discovery, and Bhavna was alluding to this, to the insights related to who are these customers, their own end customers represented in all this data. What's the data being used for? Where's the data being used? Which applications are processing all this data? And all of this on an automated basis across the enterprise and even up into the cloud ecosystems. So we're talking about an enhanced data discovery and data lineage detection step was where we began. You can't begin to apply controls and the right protection methods if you don't know what you're trying to control and protect. And what this step did is this gave them a very clear picture of where the risks were in their highly mobile, very dynamic, hyper agile, cloud-bound data ecosystem. And the lack of effective controls they needed to fix in order to meet the compliance and risk reduction mandates that Bhavna was alluding to in her segment. Without effective data discovery and lineage tracing, there's no way they could have developed mitigation strategies and tactics for the controls and data protection to strike this balance. So the second step, if discovery and lineage tracing was the first, we broke down silos. Now I'm talking about siloed processes and tools of data discovery, and then of controlling and protecting the data to create a singular, continuous, automated, iterative workflow within that organization, which, as I said, was an amalgamation of lots of organizations. So breaking down silos, but also creating a situation where it wasn't linear, it wasn't a one-off, but it was iterative. So what we did is we instrumented data security as a service into their DevOps program, which, by the way, is a new and very early stage step that they're doing in their own environment. But what it enabled their business to do was consume protected data much more rapidly with data-centric security applied. Remember, data-centric security, protecting the data without disrupting the format, and they could do this in the live environments as well as in the test environments. This holistic approach from discovery all the way through to control and protection reduces the exposure of personal data. It allowed their offshore data management without exposing it, and it created the ability to handle and process all of this massive data while enabling interesting analytics and insights so that ultimately they could come to predictive outcomes. And again, this is a large insurer. They need to understand and predict moving forward, and we enabled them to do that and to do it safely. At Comforte, our data security platform incorporates all of this in that non-siloed approach, where data discovery, classification, data lineage capabilities, they're all upstream of what we typically consider protecting the data. But it all flows then into that so that from individual customer data and who these customers are, where their data is gone, all of this could be discovered and tracked prior to applying the right mechanisms. Our platform's built to facilitate that non-siloed, that unified approach, and also to address the gaps in controls and data protection for structured data across an entire data ecosystem. So back to the customer, in their operational claims processing environment, in their master data environment, I should say, And even in their data analytics environment, the entire workflow was covered and all sensitive data was protected and usable. And we do it with a transparent approach, and it can be implemented in days or weeks, not months or years. Very often you hear the horror stories of an enterprise trying to do all this with many different tools, cobbling something together, and it can take many, many months or years. Ours is in a day to week process. And the platform is inherently cloud native. You can see that cloud was very important for this anonymous customer I was talking about. And it's important for all enterprises that are forward leaning and they're dev based so that they can get to the insights that they need. Now, I've been talking about one industry. We can do this across industries. This is not an industry specific platform that we provide for our customers. We've done it in Europe. We've done it in the US with large global retailers, with financial service organizations, payment processing, and in all of these industries. It's being able to move rapidly and work with these huge quantities of dynamic data, most of which is highly sensitive and regulated. That's the difference between competing and winning for all of these organizations we work with. In essence, they're not trying to modernize or transform. They're already kind of there. They want to drive the business forward, and that's what we're able to do. So if you're interested in diving into all this a bit further, and this wasn't meant to be a technical discussion on either side, Bhavna or I, on hows and whys and all of that, on both of our sides, we'd love to talk about how your organization is trying to gain digital innovation, what your goals are, and how you can do that through the prism that we spoke about, through that prism of comply and protect. In those processes, we can compare and contrast the controls you have, how you can optimize those, how you can reduce compliance costs, how you can streamline all of this transformation, all of this while reducing risk with a modern data engineering architecture. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. You can strike the right balance between speed and control. It's not as stressful and complicated as it sounded as I was laying out this anonymous customer situation. You can strike that balance between data analysis and proper compliance. And Bhavna and I or others, we're all here to help with that. And so with that, I'm going to pause and back up. And Catherine, pass it back over to you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Some really useful and practical insights you've got there. And so now, as part of this, we're going to go over to answers to the polls and then some questions from you, the audience. So, please keep answering the polls. Please keep the questions coming in, and we'll get through as much as we can in this last remaining section of the webinar. So, first of all, I'll just start with some of the answers to the questions. So in answer to the have you had an assessment of your IT environment infrastructure to determine whether cloud computing might be a good fit for you? Overwhelmingly yes, 100% yes. So that's good. And does that come as a surprise to you, Trevor and Bhavna? Is that what you would have expected?
Bhavna,
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, it is great to see that everyone is aware and you're trying to make sure cloud computing is fit, because as you are seeing, everyone is moving up in the cloud. So we absolutely want that companies are aware and doing their part, and we are happy to see that part. Happy to see companies are doing it.
Not surprised, but very happy.
That's good. And so for the second question we had, is data analysis using machine learning or artificial intelligence a major part of your business strategy? And for that, we've got 67% said yes, and 33% said no. Nobody's saying don't know. Surprising, not surprising? 2/3 to a third, yes to no?
I'll jump in here first. I'm not surprised by that, because in many ways, even though we've been hearing about AI and certainly ML for a very long time, these are evolving technologies, and utilizing them properly takes not only the right people. That's why we have data science as a profession. These are experts who know how to apply the tools to massive data, and the data itself has to be treated. And so organizations go very thoughtfully into this next step of data analysis. And so while many organizations are either what I call just forward leaning, they're just going to go there. They're going to be the first adopters, and they're going to be the ones who pave the way. Many other organizations, and maybe Bhavna can pick up on this, for either compliance reasons or others, they're going to be a little more cautious. And so I never would expect that 100% of the people are like, yes, we are out there with artificial intelligence all the way. And so it's good to know that while many organizations are out there or dipping the toes in the water, that others are going to make sure that it's the right technique for their data sets. Bhavna, would you agree with that?
Yes, I think I would agree with that. So I will go with what Trevor has to say here, and absolutely, like I won't be surprised as well.
And
Uh,
I'll be surprised in 10 years if we don't get nearly 100%, but right now it's just about right.
And then on the fourth question, does your organization incorporate data discovery and lineage analysis to guide proper data protection downstream? That's very interesting, actually, because we've got 25% saying yes, 75% saying don't know, and no knows. Any thoughts on that?
Bhavna, you want to take that, or you want me to jump in?
Would you care to jump in? I think I felt like
sure. No, I think I'm hearing 25% affirmative. Number one, that's good. That means we've got a quarter of the people who know that data discovery and lineage analysis is a part of the workflow. Maybe that's not necessarily part of the overall data workflow that you're aware of. However, it might be something to investigate, especially if you're an officer of the company. And it's something to understand the importance of. And Bhavna, I know that from a compliance perspective, you can definitely treat that. But from my perspective, we can't apply the right controls and protections unless we know what's there. Bob, I think that also applies over to compliance mandates, right?
Yes. So yes, this is what we are seeing most commonly is companies don't know where that data is stored, or it's stored, but it's just that it's stored hidden, or it's somewhere in the database, but no one is aware of what data has been stored. So absolutely, it's finding the actual places. It could be logs, it could be databases, it could be any locations that you may not even think of, and it could exist there. And temporary storage or storage for permanent protection or something like that. You have to figure out and then minimize it and then make sure that data is well protected.
Catherine, can I give a quick, again, draw this to a very personal situation that I bet everybody has gone through? Well, if you're like me, you're upgrading computers every 6 months and trying to hide those acquisitions from your significant other. So don't tell my wife. But every time I upgrade a personal computer, whether it's a laptop to a Mac Pro or whatever, I'm always moving data. You always have to take the entire contents of the hard drive and move it somewhere else. Maybe there's an intermediary external disk. I was going through my latest and greatest, and I realized that I had some insurance forms that were copied over and over again, because you're completely taking everything, saying, move from this computer to that, and it becomes a folder in the new one. So I had very personal information that was in many copies that was moved over to yet a new hard drive. Now expand that to the common enterprise. How much data do you think gets lost and that needs to be found and understood in order to protect it properly? Otherwise, it may accidentally wind up in some cloud bucket somewhere and nobody knew about it. And that's how these things happen. It happens in our personal lives, so it definitely happens with a large enterprise that's moving really fast.
Thank you very much. It's always good to have the personal perspective and to bring it back to those things that we, all understand in our own sort of private lives. So just moving on to some audience questions. I've got a few coming in. First of all, how is data-centric protection more secure than more mainstream methods like border protection or intrusion detection? And that's one for you again, Trevor, if that's all right.
Yeah, and I would, when we start talking about those really legacy classic forms of data protection, I almost, again, let's draw it to a personal example. You want to keep everybody off of your whether you own a house in a suburb or whether you own some land, you can build a fence around it. right? That's the old classic data at rest sitting somewhere in the middle and you build a fence. However, if you want to keep out those pesky teenagers who, I don't know, they're getting into your backyard because they keep kicking the soccer ball in, how are you really going to keep them out? You build the fence taller and taller and taller, and you have to keep maintaining it. If those kids want to get in, they're going to get in. This is exactly what you still see every single week with a lot of the data breaches, where the people who are motivated to get to this highly valuable data, you can keep building that wall higher, you can keep filling the holes, people will find a way in. And so compare that to what I was calling data-centric security, where you take the data itself and you obfuscate it. You take the sensitive information and you fuzz it out so that you look at it and it's either gibberish, that would be kind of classical encryption. And you've probably seen an encrypted piece of information. It's a long string of stuff that means nothing. You've probably also used something like an ATM and seen something like data masking, where they've just replaced most of the numbers of your bank card or your credit card with X's. These are all forms of data-centric protection in a way, in that you're protecting the data, not the borders around it. And sure, in my example, you can build a fence around it and then you can have intrusion detection by having cameras and this and that and the other. Again, people will get in. But if you protect the data itself, you inherently will have more protection, because no matter where it goes, it will be protected. Now, we even have problems with things like classical encryption. Remember, much of this will ultimately lead up to some sort of data analysis. And when you take a social security number and you encrypt it, and I wish I had an example here, you take these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, these 9 numbers, and it looks like a paragraph of gibberish. What is your data analysis application going to do with that? It's not going to know what to do. It's looking for a particular format, and that doesn't fit the format. Well, now you've got to add extra steps to either de-encrypt it. Okay, now you've deprotected it, and now it's vulnerable again. Or you can move to really strong data-centric protection, and that's what Bhavna was speaking about when you talk about either format preserving encryption or tokenization. These techniques will highly protect the data. And in the case of tokenization, you don't even have the issue of sharing keys, which in and of itself is a kind of nightmare scenario in an enterprise. The data is protected, but it preserves its format. And in my example with the customer, that's what we're talking about there, is the ability to highly protect the data, no matter where it goes. If a hacker gets to it, it's meaningless. But when it gets fed into those data analysis applications, the applications work just fine, and you can continue to innovate digitally and find insights within it. That is very, very different from putting borders and intrusion detection and all sorts of perimeter-based security around your data and hoping that those pesky kids don't climb the fence and get in.
Thank you very much. That's it's a very helpful answer. So then I've got another question, which I'm going to put to you, Bhavna, if that's okay. So how do we determine our cloud security responsibilities as an organisation when using third-party cloud service providers?
Thank you, Catherine. I think perhaps the question you would want to ask is for the service provider itself, who you're working with. Like, the question would be, do you have a shared responsibility matrix, which that matrix is something that will outline what are the responsibilities of cloud service provider, as well as what is it as you as an organization have to do in order to maintain and protect the systems. So let's take an example. Who is updating or maintaining the protection of the infrastructure itself? So the responsibility matrix would show up as to, is it a cloud service provider's responsibility? Is there something related to patching that still has to be done by the organization? So it's trying to figure out who manages the assets and who is making sure that it is well protected on the cloud platform, even coming down to the operating system level or at the application level as well. Another example we could take is, let's say, the breach notifications. Who will be responsible for notifying the regulatory authorities. Cloud service providers will do their role if it is identified within their service level agreements. And it may necessarily not be to the regulatory authorities, maybe to you as the organization. They would send the breach notifications to you, but you as an organization would still need to make sure you have the policies. You will need to notify the regulatory bodies about the specific breach within that time period, notified by that compliance framework or law. So it's ensuring that you identify the responsibility matrix, figure out what is it cloud vendors are going to do when it comes to protecting the environment, the cloud, and what is it as an organization you have to do. So asking that question, first question, is important in all. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. So I think we've got time for one final question, if that's all right, before we wrap up. And I think what would be really interesting is if there's one single piece of advice to get started, or a parting piece of advice, what would it be to each of you? And I'll start with you, Trevor, if that's okay.
I think the one bit of advice would be to, if I were an enterprise and I were looking at all of these breaches that are going on, I would obviously get my technical teams together, and I would perform an audit. I would try to look at what our existing controls and protection methods are, and what does this data protection workflow look like end to end, and really look for the weaknesses that Bhavna and I were exposing. So it's really becoming conscious. I guess that's my recommendation, because in those hyper agile environments where you're trying to move quicker and quicker and you're developing applications and working with lots of data, you tend to just forget about the fact that you need to understand what's going from the moment a piece of information is created in your environment to the moment it's deconstructed or destroyed. And you need to be conscious of this. The moment you sacrifice that consciousness for the business and moving forward, that's where risk is going to come in really, really quickly. So stop, pause, and really think and analyze.
Oh, it makes sense. You need to understand what you've got, don't you? And over to you, Bhavna.
Yes, I think I will go back to our initial slide, which says, stop fearing compliance and do business. It's important to keep that in mind. Compliance just really provides you almost a baseline security, and you will be building and you will be applying controls that are essential to do business. If you don't do that, it's going to, in the end, be an issue or a major concern for your organization. So having that baseline security is helpful, and that is what compliance is providing you. And you have to go above and beyond to really protect and ensure security for your organization. I think that's all I have to say.
No, it makes sense. I mean, compliance is there to help us. It isn't there to be something to be terrified of. So I think, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you very much to Trevor and Bhavna for sharing their advice. It's been great to have you all on the webinar, and thank you very much for your questions and for answering the polls for us. Just a quick reminder that this session will be available on demand for 24 hours after the live stream finishes. So, please do share it with colleagues, send it around. Lots of use to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us and for taking part. Please enjoy the rest of your day.